Composition of the public sector, right? Let's just start here. So we have the government or the state is the same thing with the public sector, right? And then we have different levels of government. We have the central government, which is the top level, have regional or provincial government, then we have the local government, right? So the central government, it basically is more concerned with the country as a whole, right? It is more concerned with the country as a whole. For example, they make the laws of the country, the regulations of the laws and the regulations of the country. And then regional government or provincial government, for example, this would be the government that is responsible for the province, for the Northwest province, right? So they are more concerned with the particular region or a particular province, right? And they're usually grouped into departments. So you'd find that within a particular province, there's a department of education, there's a department of agriculture, there's a department of, and so on, right? They are more concerned with a particular region or a province than the local government. They're more concerned with the particular area. So, for example, in Mafikeng, right? So a province would be the whole of Northwest, then the local will be Mafikeng or in Poch, right? Those governments that are just responsible for a particular area within a specific province, right? And they ensure that in that area, they have things like street lights, they have garbage collection, and so on. Then the public corporations, these are the businesses that are owned by the state or owned by the government, right? They are called public corporations or state-owned corporations or state-owned enterprises, right? So the general government is it consists of the central government, which is more concerned with the country as a whole, the regional or the provincial government, and the local government. And then together with the public corporations, they are what? They are the public sector, right? They refer to as the public sector. So Robert Helbronia, Robert Helbronia, said that the market has a keen ear for private wants, but a deaf ear for public needs, right? So what Robert was saying here is that the markets, they are more concerned with what people want, but they are not concerned with what people need, right? And then yeah, that's what Robert Kilbrenner said. So this basically means that the market, even though market are efficient, but they are not fair, right? Because for the markets, their main motive is to make a profit, right? So when they sell goods and services, when they produce these goods and services, their main aim or their main goal is to make a profit. So they might be efficient in their production, but they are not equitable or they are not fair because the product that they produce, um, there's a money vote counts, right? There's a price attached to those products, of which sometimes other people may not be able to afford those goods and services, right? That is now where the government will then do what? Will intervene to ensure that even the low income earners can be able to afford those particular goods and services, right? So the role of the government in the what's happening here? The role of the government in the economy. Okay, so the role of the government in the economy is to provide us with the public goods and services to ensure that um there's equitable distribution of income and to intervene when there's market failure, right? Also intervene where there's market failure. Market failure is basically a situation whereby now the market are not efficient in the allocation of resources, right? Meaning that the market what the product that they produce, it is not the right product that the customers want, and also the quantity that they produced is not the right quantity that is required by the consumers. So now the government will then have to do what to intervene in the economy to try and correct that which is called market failure, and then also to provide us with the public goods and services and yeah, and so on. So market failure as a justification for government intervention. So the government will intervene when there's what? When there's market failure, right? And I've already mentioned with the market failure, it will occur where now the market, they are not able um uh, to allocate their resources efficiently, right? They say here they are unable to achieve efficient allocation of resources. So where now there is inefficient allocation, right? Meaning that the quantities of the goods that they've produced is not the right quantity that is needed by the consumers, and also the the quantity. So the goods are not the right goods that are needed by consumers, and the quantity of those goods, it's not the right quantity that is required by consumers. So maybe there's a shortage, right? Efficient allocation of resources are allocated to produce goods and services that people want the most. So if there's efficient allocation, it means that now the goods that have been produced, it's the right goods that consumers want, and also the goods that have been produced, the quantity of goods that have been produced, it's the right quantity that the consumers require, right? But if there's market failure, it means there's inefficient allocation of resources. So there are five causes of market failure. We have monopoly and imperfect competition. Remember, monopoly means what? Mono means one, right? So this is a market structure that only has one seller and many buyers. For example, Eskom, right? Imperfect competition consists of an oligopoly and a monopolistic competition. Oligopoly, you can remember from yeah, like last semester, where now we said with imperfect competition, it basically consists of oligopoly and monopolistic competition. Oligopoly, we said it's a market structure that has fewer but large firms, right? For example, your commercial banks, you only have like 5 or 4 banks, but they are few, but they are large, right? And also cellular networks, you have Vodacom, MTN, and yeah, there are just few of them, but they are large, right? That is an oligopoly. In a monopolistic competition, we said which there are many buyers and sellers. It's a market structure that has many buyers and sellers, right? These buyers and sellers, they sell differentiated product. For example, we gave an example of a restaurant where we said which you have McDonald's and KFC. No, I want to use Nando's and KFC. They are both selling meat, right? It's the same chicken. The difference is that is with the spices that they use, right? So the cause of market failure can be monopoly and imperfect competition. Number two, number two, it can be the public goods. Public goods, these are the goods that are provided for by the government, right? Externalities is just a spillover effect to the third party that is not involved in the production process, right? Externalities can be positive and they can also be negative, right? Then we have asymmetric information. Asymmetric inf okay, asymmetric information is basically a situation whereby now a buyer and a seller, they both possess different information about the product. For example, if I have a calculator and I want to sell this calculator to you, you may think, oh, it's okay, this calculator is working, right? It's working well. If you say 1 plus 1, it gives you 2, right? But as a seller, I know that this calculator, the reason why I'm selling you this calculator, it's because it's not working anymore. If you press 1 plus 1, it gives you 0, right? Maybe if you're trying to add, it subtracts. If you're trying to multiply, it divides, right? So asymmetric information is basically where a seller and a buyer, they both possess different information about a particular product, right? Or about the transaction. And then we have common property resources. These are the resources that common common property resources. These are the resources that are from nature, but have to be regulated by the government so that they don't get exploited or we don't overutilize them, right? For example, fishes from the ocean, right? Everyone can fish, but now the government has to then now regulate to say it's okay. A person that is a fisherman, they can only fish um this amount of fishes, maybe like in a month, or yeah, and all of that. So common property resources is that. So the five causes of market failure, it's monopoly and imperfect competition, public goods, externalities, asymmetric information, and common property resources. Monopoly and imperfect competition. They're saying that monopolies and imperfect competitive firms are allocative, inefficient. Remember, we've already explained this term. Guti, when the firm is allocative, inefficient, it basically means Guti, the product that they produce, it's not the right goods and services that consumers want, and also the quantity that is being produced, it's not the quantity that is required by the consumers. So monopolies and imperfect competitive firms, they are what? They're allocative, inefficient. For example, I'll make an example with Eskom, right? Because it's part of it falls under the monopoly. As it is just one Eskom is one seller. Remember for monopoly, we said there is one seller selling to everyone in the market, right? There's one seller, but there are many buyers. So for Eskom, it's just one seller, which is Eskom, and then the buyers, it's everyone in the country, right? So they are allocative inefficient because you find that sometimes you experience load shedding, right? Load shedding is basically a sign that they are not efficient. Now they are trying to limit their quantities, right? Through what? Through load shedding, right? And then so the government can either regulate the private product of monopolies or undertakes its production. So for monopolies, for example, if they're inefficient, the government can try to regulate their production or can take over its production itself. So they gave an example, monopolies, it's Eskom and Transnet, oligopolies, it's banks, cellular firms, and airlines. Monopolistic competition is supermarket and fast food. Yeah, the restaurant. And the second um cause of market failure can be what? The public goods, right? So they gave us a difference here between the private good and the public goods. So private goods are goods that are consumed by individuals or households, right? These goods they are private, right? Because they can only be consumed by individuals or households. For example, if you have a car, it becomes your own car. It can only be used by you, right? But then for public goods, they can be consumed by the community or the society, right? For example, a street light, right? Or the road, right? So public goods, there are two characteristics of pure public goods, right? The characteristics of public goods is that they are non-drivery, they are non-excludable, is- they are non-excludable, and they are non-driver in consumption, right? Non-excludable, it basically means that with a public good, it is impossible for you to prevent someone from obtaining the benefit or from using that good, right? If you have a public good, it's impossible for you to prevent someone from obtaining the benefit from that good or from consuming that good. For example, here, a street light is a public good, right? It's impossible for me to prevent you from obtaining this light from the street light, right? It is very impossible, right? So public goods are non-excludable. Also, it's impossible for me to prevent you from using the road, right? So public goods are non-excludable. And okay, the non-excludability of public goods, it arises what we call free rider problem, right? Or free riders. So a free rider is basically a person that wants to consume a good or service without paying for it, right? So everyone wants to like to get to use the street lights, right? But no one wants to pay for it, right? This because they know that once it is on, it's going to be on for everyone else, right? So why then would I want to pay for a street light? Because if it is on, it's going to benefit everyone else. right? So free riders is basically a person that wants to obtain a benefit from a public good but does not want to pay for it. So public goods, two characteristics is non-excludability, meaning that it's impossible to prevent someone from obtaining the benefit or from consuming it. And then public goods are also non-driverless in consumption. Non-driverless in consumption, it basically means that the consumption by one person, I'm reading from here, the consumption by one person does not reduce the consumption from another person, right? For example, let me just go back to the street lights. The consumption by me, so if I walk here and I I get this light from the street lights and you're walking behind me, it doesn't mean that I walked here before you, then that when you're walking here, the lights will be less, right? I don't know if I'm making sense. You will still get the same lights that I got when I was passing here, right? So public goods are non-driverless in consumption in a sense that the consumption by one person, it does not reduce the consumption for another person, right? For example, they give example street lights, defense, national parks, and etc. So the government levies taxes to fund production of these goods. So you know that taxes is one of the largest source of government revenue. So for government to provide us with these public goods, the government has to do what? To to charge to levy tax and then get this taxation and then use this money from taxation to provide us with this public goods and services, right? So the causes of market failure we've dealt with two, which is a monopoly and imperfect competition. And then we looked at public goods, where we said goods, public goods have two characteristics. Non-excludability, meaning that you cannot include another person from obtaining the benefit from this good. And non-drivery in consumption, meaning that the consumption by one person does not reduce the consumption for another person, right? You will still get the same amount of lights that I got from that street lights, right? Even if like I walk here maybe at 6 and then you pass here maybe at 9, you're still gonna get the same lights that I got at 6. So with the non-excludability, it arises what we call free riders, and those are the people that want to enjoy the benefit of a good without paying for it, right? And then the private good, they are excludable, right? For example, let's go back to the car, right? This one. If you buy a car, it's a private good because it can only be consumed by you, right? Or maybe your close family members, but let's just say you are the only person that can use that car. So it is excludable in the sense that you can prevent others from obtaining the benefit from it or from using it. So private goods are excludable. And also they are diverse in nature, meaning that the consumption by one person, it reduces the consumption for other people. So if you go to the shop and you buy this black car, it means you would see another person when they come, they will not find this black car, right? Maybe they would find another type, maybe a blue car or maybe a black one, but not this one, right? So private goods, they are excludable and they are various in consumption. So they gave an example to say bread, cell phone, it sits in the cinema. So if a person comes and sits here in a cinema, it means ukuthi this person, another person cannot come and sit here. If these seats they are 50 and I sit here, it means now the seats that are left they are 49. Right. And this is a private good because it is various. The consumption by one person, it reduces the consumption by other people, right? Because I've obtained this seat, now the other seats that are available for others, they are now what? They are now 49. They're no longer 50, right? If they were 50 seats, right? But with the public good, they are non-driverless in consumption because the consumption of one person does not reduce the consumption of another person. For a street light, if this person is walking here and I also come and I pass here, I'm gonna get the same amount of light that he obtained, right? Other public goods. So we have crime control. The police is offered by the government, traffic law enforcement, and road maintenance, right? And then we look at externalities, right? So we've looked at the causes of market failure, we looked at monopoly and imperfect competition, imperfect competitive markets, and then we also looked at public goods, and then we also looked at number three is externalities, right? So with the monopolies and imperfect competitive firms, we said they as much as we said these firms they are inefficient, right, in the allocation of resources, meaning that the they do not produce the right quantity of goods that is needed by our consumers, the right goods that is needed by our consumers, and also even the quantities that they produce, it's not required by consumers, right? Which now then the government has to intervene, right, for monopolies and imperfect competition. Then also look at the public sector, where we said um public goods, we said some public goods have two characteristics, which is that they are non-excludable and non-driverous in consumption, right? Meaning that you cannot include others from benefiting from them. And non-driverous in consumption means that the consumption by one person, it does not reduce the consumption of other people. While a private good, they are excludable and also they are driverous in consumption because the consumption by one person, it reduces the quantities now that is available for another person, right? And then now we're going to look at externalities, which is another cause for market failure, right? Market failure, we basically said it's a situation where the market are not able, they are not able to allocate resources efficiently, right? There's allocation inefficiency. So externalities, these are the spillover effect to a third party that is not involved in the production process, right? It's a spillover effect. And these spillover, again, they can be one, they can be positive or they can be negative, right? Externalities are also called spillover effect or neighborhood effect or third party effect, right? Which are basically the spillover effects to the third party not involved in the production process, and these effects can be positive or negative, right? So when a firm produces goods and services for consumers, they may in the process actually add pollutants into the air and the water. The cost of cleaning the pollution is not charged in the price. However, the damage to the environment represents the cost to the society. So I'm basically saying that here, they're referring to a negative externality where now a firm is producing a particular product that is that adds pollutants into the air and the water, right? So their production pollutes the air and the water, right? So um this this damage, it is a cost to the society, right? Because this is the air and this is the water that society drinks, or so this is the cost to the society, but this cost here is not reflected in the price that is charged, right? The society now, they are the one that bear this cost because now they get sick, they have to go to the hospital, they have to buy medications and so on and so on, right? So example of negative externalities is a heavy vehicle that travel on a national road cause serious damage to the road, atmospheric pollution, and so on. So an example of a negative externality is a heavy vehicle, right? So this vehicle is heavy, and what it does is that it damages the road, it causes pollution and noise. So this is this is bad for the society, right? It so now this is a negative externality because this vehicle damages the road and causes pollution. So what the government will do now to try and discourage the use of these heavy vehicles, the government will charge higher license fees and toll fees to this vehicle, right, to the owner of this vehicle. So externalities is the spillover effect to the third party that is not involved in the production process, right? And then externalities, they can be positive and negative. Negative externalities, they are harmful to the society. For example, here, this heavy vehicle, it damages the road, right? And also causes pollution, connection, and noise. So these are all what? Harmful to the society, right? So now the government to try and discourage the use of these heavy vehicles, the government will charge higher license fees and toll fees than other vehicles. And then, as I mentioned earlier, to say that externalities, they can be positive and negative, right? So negative externalities are also called external cost, and positive externalities are also called external benefit, right? For negative externalities, the marginal social cost is greater than the marginal private cost, right? Meaning that the cost to the society is greater than the cost that is felt or that is incurred by the that particular firm, right? So, for example, here they said, Uti, there was this firm that was they're producing these items which pollutes the air and the water, right? So, the cost that the society will feel is much greater than the cost that that firm will incur, right? For items that have negative externalities. And then for external benefit, which is also also called the positive externalities, the marginal social cost is less than the marginal private cost. So meaning that has this benefits the society more than the the firm itself. So for example, if there was a company maybe that comes in a particular region or in a particular area, and maybe and then they established a company there, then they build it there. It's gonna benefit that particular area because now better road will be made and people of that area will be employed and so on. So you can see that the the establishing of that company in that area, it has a what? It has a positive externality or it has an external benefit, right? To the third party, right? To the people in that community. So the cost to the society will be much less than the what? The cost of that particular firm, right? So the marginal social cost is less than the marginal private cost. The negative externalities, we said ukuthi these are spillover effects that are harmful to the society, right? Or these are the cost to the society. For example, pollution, household waste, industrial pollution, public smoking, deforestation, water contamination, right? These are all negative externalities, right? And you know, externalities is a spillover effect to a third party that is not involved in the production process, right? So these are negative spillover effect, or these are cost to the society, right? Also a third party that is not involved in the production process. So why do externalities cause market failure? So externalities will cause market failure because the price mechanism cannot accurately capture the true cost of the externality, meaning that the price um cannot capture the cost or the benefit of that particular um product, right? Or of that production or of the production of that particular product. They're saying that so there is an external cost or an external benefit that is not reflected in the price. So in the price of that product, there's an external cost or an external benefit that is not included. For they continue to say that positive externalities, these are actions of okay, already explained this one. But for positive externalities is the activities of a one party that leads a benefit or that is positive to a third party that is not directly involved in the production process, right? Positive externalities, it's when one person's activity have a positive or benefits the third party that is not involved in the production process, right? And then negative externalities is when these activities creates a cost to a third party and that cost is not what and that part is not compensated for those costs, right? So negative externalities, they say it imposes a cost to the other party for which he or she is not compensated for, right? Negative externalities is just the spillover effects that are harmful to the third party, right? And impose a cost to the third party and that he or she is not compensated for, right? So positive externalities, they are beneficial, they are positive, and then negative, they are not, they are harmful. And then they impose a cost to the third party. Negative externalities in a perfect competitive market. So you can see there's a graph here which illustrate negative externalities. So our DD and SS is the original supply curve and the original demand curve, right? Here the equilibrium is E1 and the price is P1 and the quantity is Q1, right? So because this is the production of a product that has a negative externality, meaning that creates a cost for the third party, then the government will impose what? Will impose tax, right? So if the government imposes tax, the price will now increase from from P1 to P2, right? The price of this product. For example, let's say it's tobacco, right? Because it has a negative externality to the third party. The government imposes tax on production. So now the suppliers they decrease their supply from S, this one, to this supply curve. And then the price is going to increase and then the quantity is going to decrease from Q to Q1, right? So now when the price is here, okay, so this curve here is represented by the marginal private cost, right? These were the cost of the business, right? And then the government adds taxation to discourage this consumption and then this production of this product, then the price increase, then the supply curve shift from E1 to E2, right? This equilibrium point here. And then this is now the marginal social cost. Why? Because even though the government is trying to discourage this consumption, but these costs that are going to be felt by the society, they are not reflected in what? In the price. Right? Remember we said here, Wuti, why do externalities cause market failure? Because the cost or the benefit that are felt by the society, they are not being reflected in the what? In the price. So this space here, it becomes the what? The external cost or the welfare loss. Right? So if you take the marginal private cost plus the external cost, you get the marginal social cost. So this is the cost that will be felt by the society because of the production of this products that has a what? A negative externality. Right. So asymmetric information. Now, the causes of market failure, we said number one, we said it was monopolies and um almost said monopolistic. Yeah, monopolies and imperfect competition, which now imperfect competition consists of monopolistic competition as well as oligopolies, right? Oligopolies. Then we said which these markets have allocative inefficient, right? And allocative inefficiency, we said which it's situation where now the firms they do not produce the right goods and services that are needed by consumers, and also now where the quantities um that they produce, it's not the quantities of good that are required by consumers, right? And then that would lead to market failure. Then number two, we spoke of public goods. The public goods they are offered by the government. And then we said the public goods have two characteristics. They are non-excludable and they are non-driver in consumption. Non-excludable meaning that you cannot exclude people from obtaining the benefit from those goods, and then non-driver in consumption in the sense that the consumption from one person does not reduce the consumption of another person, right? And the private goods were they are excludable and they are rivalrous. Then also spoke of the externalities where we said it's the spillover effect, right? So it's that third party that is not involved in the production. So that spillover effect can be a positive effect or a negative effect, right? We said if it's a negative effect, then it becomes a cost to the third party, right? And they are not compensated for that. But then if it's a negative, if it's a negative effect, it is a cost to the third party. But if it's positive, then it becomes what? A benefit to a third party, right? And then now we're looking at asymmetric information. Asymmetric information is situation in which a buyer and a seller possesses different information about a transaction, right? So I made an example at the beginning to say that okay, let's just use this example. They're saying that a used car owner knows more about it than does a potential buyer. A doctor knows more medical services than does the patient, and so on. So if I sell you maybe my calculator, right, and I know that it doesn't work, it's not like I know that if you say 1 plus 1, it's gonna give you 0. So it's gonna give you 2. So I know that my calculator is not functioning well. But because you are buying it, you probably think, oh, it's okay, maybe it's working well, right? So that's asymmetric of information. We possess different information about about the transaction. So now the government will intervene there, right? The government will intervene to try and to ensure that all the information about a particular product or about a transaction is being provided. For example, when you're buying cigarettes, right? The box of cigarettes, it'll be written outside that it causes cancer, it is bad for your lungs, it's all those things, right? But then that is done to do what? To make sure that a buyer, the market as a seller and you both have the same information about what? About the transaction. So if you decide to buy that product, it's because you have decided to buy it. It's not because maybe you are misled or anything, right? So asymmetrical information is just trying to make sure that it's a situation where buyer and seller possess different information about a transaction. So now the government will intervene to ensure that all the information about a particular transaction is being provided. And then number E, common property resources, right? Common property resources, they are non-excludable but drive variance in consumption. Non-excludable meaning that it is impossible to prevent someone from using it or from obtaining the benefit from them. And then drive variance in a sense that the consumption from one person, it reduces the consumption of the other person. For example, the fish here that you fish in the sea, if 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 this person, if you fish the fishes in the sea, it reduces the amount that is available for someone else, right? So it is dry various, but it's non-excludable because you can go there and then you can fish also, right? So the government also intervenes there in common property resources such as um common land for grazing um fishing to try and to the government will intervene here to try and to ensure that we do not overutilize these things or you do not exploit them, right? Pela, we want to keep them also for the future generation. Imagine if everyone just goes to the sea and they fish and they fish and they fish. They even fish like the small babies, the baby fishes and the grandmothers and all of that, right? It'll they they would finish them, then what happens after that? We no longer have fish, right? So the government will then now intervene to try and make sure that there are rules and there are laws that guide people on how much fish they should, on how many fishes they should fish, on maybe even give them a license to say, okay, if you want to be a fisherman, you should have a license, right? And all of that. So common property resources is all about that. It's one of the causes of market failure as well. And then they said here, common property resources tend to be over exploited, right? Even to the extent of destruction. The role of government is therefore to establish property right or regulate activities through taxes. You see, the government can even charge taxes on people that use these resources or subsidize or charge user charges or come up with laws and rules and regulations, right? exactly what I just said. Okay, so the causes for market failure, we looked at monopoly and compet we looked at monopoly and imperfect competition, where we said we would see a monopoly. Mono means one. The example is Escom, and then um keep forgetting this one. Imperfect competition. So it's monopolies and imperfect competition. So monopolies, we say mono means one, and then imperfect competition, it's where you have your oligopoly and your monopolistic competition, right? And then we said we would see these ones, um, they have what? Allocative inefficiency, right? Because they do not produce the right quantities of goods that consumers want, and also the right goods that consumers want, and also the quantity that they require is not available, right? And then also looked at public goods which are offered by the government and the two characteristics, which is non-excludability and non-rivalrous in consumption. Then we looked at what did we look at? We looked at asymmetric information, where we said we would see it's basically where a buyer and a seller, they both possess different information about the transaction, right? And the government now will then come in to make sure that all the information about a particular transaction is provided, right? And then we also looked at externalities. We said it's a spillover effect to a third party that is not involved in the production process. That spillover effect can be positive or negative, right? So if it is positive, it means that it benefits the third party. But if it's negative, then it's a cost to the third party, right? Then we also looked at the last one, which is common property resources, where we said duty, these resources, they are non-excludable, but they are various in consumption, right? And the government often intervenes to make sure that they are not overexploited. Now we're looking at the merit and the demerit goods, right? Merit, right? If you receive a merit certificate, it means that you've done something good, right? So also merit goods, these are goods that are regarded as beneficial to the society and that everyone should be able to use or consume them irrespective of their income, right? So merit goods are goods that are beneficial to the society and that everyone should be able to consume them regardless of their income. Those are what's the merit goods. So for example, education, everyone should have access to education, to healthcare, to shelter, fire protection, and sport facilities. Right? These are merit goods that everyone should have. They're regarded as beneficial and that everyone should be able to receive them or to consume them, respective of their income. And then merit bad or demerit goods. Demerit goods, these are goods that are harmful to the society, right? These goods are harmful to the society. And the government often comes in to try and discourage the consumption of these goods because they are harmful to the society. The government will come and maybe like charge taxes on these goods, right? To try and discourage the consumption of these goods because they are harmful to the society. For example, tobacco, addictive drugs, and gambling, right? So government will charge taxes such as sin tax or exercise duties, right? Those are taxes that are charged on what demerit goods by the government to try and do what and discourage the consumption of these goods because they are harmful to the society. And then these are types of merit good. We said merit good, these one are good. These one are beneficial to society. These are goods that everyone should be able to consume regardless of their income, right? Education, health, fire protection, and sports facilities. And these ones, demerit goods or merit bad, these ones are bad. They are harmful to the society, and the government will intervene to try and discourage the consumption of these goods: alcohol, tobacco, high sugar and high fat food, high caffeine energy drinks, right? Then we have income distribution, right? So this is also another cause of market failure, right? So we've looked at monopoly and imperfect competition. We've looked at externalities. We've looked at public goods. We've looked at asymmetric of information and what common property resources. And then we looked at merit and demerit goods. And then now we're looking at income distribution. So income distribution. So income distribution. So the free markets, they tend to generate an unequal distribution of income, right? The markets, they generate what? An unequal distribution of income. So what does this mean? It means that, in with the free market, if you are, maybe let's say you are working and in the same department, but then you are earning different wages or salaries, right? That is what unequal distribution of income. So in the free market, they tend to generate unequal distribution of income in a sense that some the the salaries that they pay to their workers are not the same. For example, a person working as a cleaner would get far more less than a person who's working as an administrator or as a clerk or financial something something, right? Their income that they get will not be the same, right? So the government usually come up with the measures to try and do what and reduce the income inequality gap, right? That is caused by what? By the free market. So what the government will do is, okay, so they're saying that the unequal distribution of income, it will make the society to be what? Unhappy, right? So now the government measures will be progressive income taxation. So what the government will do is the government will use progressive income taxation. So when the government is taxing people now, they would use what? The progressive income tax, whereby the high income earners pay more than the low income earners, right? Which means that the greater your income, the greater percentage of tax you pay, right? If you earn more, you pay more, right? We also have the government can also provide other goods for free or subsidize some of the goods. For example, with brown bread, it is zero rated, meaning that you don't pay VAT for brown bread, right? That is the government subsidizing that product to make sure that we are able to afford it, right? To reduce this income inequality gap. Also, cash transfer payment. Cash transfer payment, these are payment by the government. These are cash payments by the government to us, right? So the government can provide us with the cash transfer payments such as child support grant, old age pensions, unemployment benefit, and or unemployment benefits, right? Also, this is offered by the government to do what? To reduce the income inequality gap. And then the government can also have what? Legislation or other forms of regulation, such as labor laws or the minimum wage law, right? The minimum wage law, it basically says ukuthi every person, regardless of the position that they are working in, right? If you are employed, you should get, for example, let's just say, where's this pen? Okay, so for example, you have you have your labor supplied, you have your labor demanded, and then you have, maybe let's say people are getting um the wages 500 rand, right? So the government will come with a law, which is a minimum wage law, which basically state that this is the minimum amount that people should get, right? Every person that is working, I'm just gonna make an example, I'm just gonna say 1,000. So every person that is working, right, regardless of whether they are in any industry that they might be working at, that person should earn what? 1,000 and above, right? So that's what the minimum wage is saying. So the government will come with these such laws to try and reduce the income inequality gap, right? Which is caused by what? By AMA market, right? So the government to try and reduce the income inequality gap, the government can use the progressive income taxation, where now the higher income earners, they pay more than the low income earners, or provide other product for free, or subsidize other product, or provide us with the cash transfer payment, which are basically the cash payment that is given to the low income earners by the what? By the government, right? Which is child support grant, old pension, and UIF. Or the government can just come up with the laws and regulations that or laws and regulations such as the minimum wage, right? To say that every person that is working should get this amount and above, right? And in the example that I made, it was 1,000, right? So meaning that every person, regardless of which department they are working in, they must be paid 1,000 and above. Number 4, the macroeconomic growth and stability, right? So another causes for market failure, it's market economic growth and stability. So the free market system, they failed to do what? To achieve the macroeconomic objective, right? Of economic growth, full employment, and price stability. That is where now the government has to intervene to try and achieve these macroeconomic objective, right? So the free market, remember we said Uguti from the beginning, we said Uguti, market failure is situation basically where the market um they they cannot allocate resources efficiently, right? And then I said Uguti allocative inefficiently means Uguti the right goods and services, they have not produced the right goods and services that is needed by our consumers. And also the quantity that is required by consumers is not available, right? So if the markets they are inefficient, in that case, they cannot achieve what economic growth. Economic growth, remember we said it's an increase in the production capacity of the country, right? So if the market, if the quantities of wood that they produced is not the quantity that is if the quantity of good that the consumers want is not available, it means ukuthi they have not, it means ukuthi their production, there's a shortage with their production because the quantities of good that the consumers want is not available, right? And economic growth is what? Is an increase in the production capacity, right? And then also they fail to achieve full employment and also price stability, right? Because they are more focused on making a profit. They tend to charge higher prices, right? So prices they cannot achieve price stability in a sense that because with price stability, we are saying that we do not want to have inflation, mean that we don't want prices to be too high, and also do not want to have deflation, mean that we don't want prices to be too low. We just want prices to be stable. So with the free market systems, their main aim is to make profit. So they're always trying to reach for what? For higher prices, which lead to inflation. So the free market, they fail then to achieve the macroeconomic objectives of economic growth, full employment, and price stability. Then now the government has to intervene to do what? To achieve these macroeconomic objectives. The government will then intervene by using what? The fiscal policy. And then obviously monetary policy is used by the South African Reserve Bank to try now and stabilize the economy. So the fiscal policy, it refers to the use of government spending, taxation, and borrowing to affect what activities. So how does the government intervene? By provision of public goods and services, right? So public goods such as national defense and infrastructure, or public ownership or public financing of production. So the government can take ownership of that particular company or can provide financing or can provide financing to that particular company, right? That private sector. Market participant, the government is the largest employer, right? The government employs most people in the country. Remember, we have public schools, public hospital, right? Those are public owned businesses, right? And those people that work there, they're employed by the government. And then government is also an important purchaser of goods and services. Also now the government to provide us with the public goods and services, the government has to purchase these goods and services, right? And then government spending, also government spends on us. For example, via pensions, child support grant, disability grants, and also provides various subsidies. Taxation. Taxation is the main source of government revenue, right? And then the government can use taxation to fund government initiatives, and it can also be used for things such as redistribution of income, promote desirable activities, penalize undesirable activities, sugar tax, and negative externalities. Right, undesirable activities would be goods that have negative externalities, yes. So the government will charge what? Will charge tax on those goods. The government failure. The government fail. So the government will fail because of the role of politicians, right? So politicians, they are more concerned about getting votes, right? They are more concerned about getting votes from the public. So most of the things that they do there in the government, because you need to remember that the government is not just one person. It's made of a group of people. It's a structure that consists of different categories. I don't know, but it's not just one person. So the government will also fail because of politicians, right? And politicians because what? Their most focus is on what? On getting votes and trying to convince the public that they are um they should be the ones that should be voted for, and so on, right? And also the government will fail because of the role of bureaucratics, right? Bureaucratic, it refers to the agents of the public, and these agents, they do not always they do not always serve the interest of the public. They are more so the the role of the bureaucratic, right? Bureaucratic, these are agents to the public, but they do not always serve the interest of the public, right? Because they always want to benefit themselves. And then rent-seeking interest, it refers to our unions and individuals that always try to influence the government to act in a way that benefits them. So these are people that try to influence the government to act in a way that benefits them. Management failure. So we know that within the government there might be management failure where um they they are unable to manage each other. Yeah. And then lack of motivation and apathy. So lack of motivation and apathy is quite the same. A lack of motivation, um, for example, people that work there within the government, right? Most of them, they are more concerned about they want to make money, right? Because if you work within the government, your main focus, or the main thing that you should be doing, is to try and serve the citizens, right? To serve the people, the public. But you find out with the people there, they're not motivated um by that, but they are more motivated by what? Not even that they are motivated, their main focus is just to make money, right? So they lack motivation. And then apathy, it means that when now the people there's a lack of interest about something. For example, people that work there, they do not really care about community problems, right? Hey, I'm just saying, because I don't want to be cancelled. But like apathy, it basically means ukuthi where the people, they do not really care about what the problems of the community, right? So this is the reason why the government might sometimes fail. The role of the politicians that only care about getting votes, the role of bureaucratic that only want to benefit themselves, the rent-seeking interest group that always try to influence the government to act in the way that benefits them. Management failure, this one is self-explanatory. Lack of motivation because their focus is on making money, right? Then serving the community. And apathy, not caring about the community, but caring more about the benefit of the position that a person is occupying. Right. Then we have nationalization and privatization. Right. Nationalization, nationalization, it means that the government takes over ownership of a private enterprise, right? That's nationalization. The government will take over the ownership of a private enterprise. And then with the privatization, an enterprise that is owned by the government will be taken over by what? By by a private individual, right? So nationalization is the government taking over a privately owned enterprise, and then privatization is the government enterprise or yes, or a state-owned enterprise taken over by what? A private individual, right? So privatization, we're moving from the government to what? To the private sector, and then from nationalization, it we're moving from the what? From the private sector to the what? Private ownership to the what? Public ownership, right? So fiscal policy and the budget. So every government must regulate how much to spend, what to spend it on, and how to finance its expenditure. Right? Fiscal policy is the same as the budget, and within the budget of the government must decide how much to spend, what to spend it on, and how to finance its expenditure. For example, if you have your own budget, right? I want to draw up. You would have your income here. You have your income here, and then under your income, maybe you're gonna write it, okay. Okay, no, you're gonna have your income and then you're gonna have your expenses, right? Right. Your income and your expenses. And then under your income, no, let me use this one. And then now within your budget, you should ask yourself, okay, for my income, the income part, it answers this question with how to finance its expenditure, right? Okay, so how to finance my expenditure. So I'm going to finance my expenditure by what? By NSFAS, and then what to spend it on. So now, what am I going to spend my NSFAS on? I'm gonna write here, Guti. Maybe I'll buy clothes, and then how much to spend. Maybe for clothes, I'm gonna spend 300 rand. Okay, so I forgot to put the amount. Maybe my NSFAS is 500 rand. And then I'm gonna be left with what? With 200 rand. Right. So this is the government budget is also like this, but now here for the income, it's probably taxation, because the government, the main source of government revenue value is tax. So probably have taxation, and then expenses, obviously it's government expenditure, spending on public goods and so on, right? So every government must regulate how much to spend, what to spend its income on, and how to finance its expenditure. Right. And then they go on to say that the government must therefore have a policy in respect of the level, the level of government spending, taxation, and borrowing, which is what the fiscal policy though. So the fiscal policy or the budget it's a policy which is made in respect of the government spending, taxation, and borrowings. Right. So the main instrument is the budget or the fiscal policy. The main instrument of the government is the budget or the fiscal policy. And the main policy variables is the government spending and taxation, right? Also borrowings, but then the main is government spending and taxation. So if the income is greater than the expenses, there's a budget deficit. Sorry, there's a budget surplus. But if the expenses are greater than the income, then there's a budget deficit, right? The fiscal policy and the budget. In South Africa, the major instrument of the fiscal policy is the budget, and the main policy variables are government spending and taxation. So within the fiscal policy, the variables that the government uses is what is the government spending and taxation. The budget is essentially a reflection of political decision about how much to spend, what to spend it on, and how to finance the spending, right? So you just think of your budget. Your budget will tell you the how are you going to finance your spending by NSFAS? Then what are you going to spend on? On clothes and grocery. Then how much are you going to spend on those things? And then on grocery, it's 200 Rand, on clothes, 100 Rand, right? That is what will be reflected on the budget. So the government spending can be financed through, so the government spending can be financed through taxation. So to finance the government expenditure, the government can do what? Um, can get funding by charging tax or levying taxes, and then also by income from property, meaning that the government can own certain properties, right? And then also from borrowing, where now the government can borrow from other firms within the country or can borrow from the foreign countries, or the government can borrow from the South African Reserve Bank. So the government is financed by taxation, income from property, or borrowings. Fiscal policy and the budget. So remember we said within the fiscal policy, there are two main variables, right? We said there are two main variables. There are two main policy variables, which is government spending and taxation, right? So if, let me just, I'm going to draw a business cycle here. Right, so we said that in the what? In the fiscal policy, there are two main policy variables, which is your government expenditure and taxation, right? The government in the fiscal policy, right, to try and stabilize the economy, the government will use the government expenditure and taxation, right? So if the economy is in, let me just use a different color. So if we are in this phase, right, which is called the expansionary phase, the government will use what? The contractionary fiscal policy or the restrictive fiscal policy, right? Remember, this is always vice versa. So this is the expansionary phase, right? You would expect the government to use the expansionary fiscal policy, right? But that is not the case. Same thing with the monetary policy, right? Remember, if we're in an expansionary phase, meaning that the economy is growing rapidly, so to try and slow down a growing economy, the government, in using the fiscal policy, the government will use what? The contractionary fiscal policy or the restrictive fiscal policy. It's the same thing. By doing what game? Since the two main fiscal variables, which are two main policy variables which are used by the government, which is taxation and government expenditure in trying to stabilize the economy using the fiscal policy. So when we are in an expansionary phase, the government will do what? Remember, in the expansionary phase, the economy is growing rapidly, right? People have more money, so people are demanding goods and services. So the government will reduce government expenditure, right? G for government expenditure, right? And then the government will increase the taxes because people have more money, right? So if the government increases taxes, it will reduce the money that people have, right? So they're saying here, contractional fiscal policy applied when the economy is expanding rapidly. So the economy is here in the expansionary phase of the business cycle, and there is inflation, right? Obviously, because people have more money, so prices are increasing, right? Remember, when people have more money, it leads to demand pull inflation, right? So now the government will increase the taxes here, and then people to reduce the amount of money that people have. So this will lead to, and they are inflation imbalance. Oh no, they're basically saying that in this phase, they are what? They're inflation and balance of payment problems. So that the government will then intervene to try and reduce those problems by decreasing government expenditure and increasing the taxes, right? Same thing if the economy is in this phase here, which is the contractionary phase, right? The economic activities are declining, right? So to try and stimulate economic activities here, the government will use what? The expansionary fiscal policy, right? Remember, this is the contractionary phase. So in the contractionary, they will use what? The expansionary fiscal policy, right? It's just vice versa. So the government will do what? Will increase government expenditure, G for government expenditure or government spending, and will reduce taxes. So by reducing taxes and increasing government expenditure, people will have more money, right? And then they would use that money to what? To spend on goods and services, right? Budget deficits tend to increase. However, this would lead to what? To a deficit. Because remember, if the government expenditure increase, this is like an expense of the government, right? And then it reduces taxation. If taxation are decreased, it means now the revenue that the government is gonna get from tax will also decrease, right? And this is like an income to the government, right? So if income decreases and increase expenses, it would lead to what? To a deficit, to a budget deficit, right? It's like in the budget that I made, where I said what your income is maybe your NSFAS, and then N for NSFAS, and your expenses I was what? C for clothes. So now if your NSFAS is reduced, in my example it was 500 rand, say now it's 300, and now your expenses are what? 400. You wanna buy clothes for 400. You see now the income is less than the expense, then you have what? A deficit because the expense are greater than the income, right? Okay. Fiscal policy and the budget. So remember the fiscal policy is the instrument that is used by what? By the government to try and stabilize the economy, right? By using what? Government expenditure, the two main policy variables, which is government expenditure and taxation, right? And within the fiscal policy, we have the contractionary fiscal policy and the expansionary fiscal policy. And then here they also are okay, monetary policy, which is conducted by the central bank. So the monetary policy is the policy of the central bank. So in the contractionary, so they will use the contractionary monetary policy whereby they would increase the repo rate. Let me just do it. So also when you have something like this, I'm going to draw a small business cycle. So this is our business cycle. And then if the economy is here in the expansionary phase, right? It's growing rapidly, right? People have more money. So the South African Reserve Bank will use the contractionary monetary policy where they will increase the repo rates. If they increase the repo rates, the commercial banks will also increase the interest rates, making it difficult for us to borrow money, right? Making it expensive to borrow money, right? And then our consumption will start to decrease. Also, if the economy is here in the contractionary phase, the central bank can use what's the expansionary monetary policy, where they will decrease the repo rate. And then the banks will also decrease the interest rate. And then it becomes cheaper for people to borrow money from the banks, right? Then they borrow money, then they invest that money, they build jobs are created and all of that. So government spending, we already said was the government spend on public goods, transfer payment, and so on. Reason for an increased government spending in South Africa. So why would the government spending increase? So the government spending will increase because of changing in consumer preferences. So if the consumer preferences they start to change, the government spending will also change. Political and other shocks. Political, such as maybe if there is war, maybe between South Africa and another country, then the government will need to spend on defense, on buying guns, and so on. And then other shocks, such as COVID-19, right? A pandemic that was not expected. So government had to increase what the government spending. Plus the government had to provide medication and so on, or redistribution of income, right? So redistribution of income, where now the government is distributing income from the rich to the poor via via the taxation, collecting tax and providing it to the poor through what? Through transfer payment. Right. Transfer payment, we said cash transfer payment, we said that is the cash that is given to the citizen by the government, mostly the low income earners. For example, pension, old um old age pension, money, social grant, and so on. Misconceptions and entitlement. Also, these will cause the government expenditure to increase or government spending to increase. Misconceptions where um there are people that basically think that the government has money, right? So they feel they are entitled. They feel that the government has to provide certain items for them, right? So that entitlement can lead to an increase in government expenditure and also population growth and urbanization. So if the population is growing, obviously the government expenditure will increase. Urbanization is basically people moving from rural areas to the cities, right? It will cause the government to increase its expenditure in that city because now there are more people in that particular city, right? And then how is the government expenditure financed? By income from property. We said if the government owns properties, the income from those properties that the government owns, and then by taxes also, the government charges or levy tax to the citizens. And then by borrowings, the government can also borrow money. Taxation is a compulsory payment, right? And it's the largest source of government revenue, right? It is the compulsory payment that is paid to the government and is the largest source of government revenue. So taxation can be used to achieve various objectives. So what can we use tax for? Tax can be used to redistribute income, right? By using the progressive tax system, whereby now the progressive tax system, it basically says that the higher you earn, the higher you pay. And then so the government takes the income from those people that pay tax to provide the low income earners with the transfer payment. The government also uses taxation to promote certain desirable activities. For example, activities that have a positive externality. Government can provide subsidies to those ec- to those to that particular company that produces that good with a positive externality, or the government can reduce their tax rate. The taxation can also be used to penalize activities that are undesirable, right? So activities that have a negative externality, right? The government can then now penalize those activities by charging them sin tax or exercise duties, right? Those are taxes which are charged on demerit goods. Or the government can also use taxation to internalize the social cost of negative externalities, meaning that the government can charge tax to those responsible for activities with negative externalities, right? So the government can use taxation to redistribute income, to promote desirable activities, and to penalize undesirable activities, and then to hold the people accountable for negative externalities accountable. To hold people responsible for negative externalities accountable, yes. And then the criteria for good tax. So good tax, for a tax to be good, it has to the criteria is neutrality. So neutrality, it basically means the tax must be as low as possible. So here they say it should have the minimum possible effect on the relative price, right? And also equity, meaning that the tax burden should be spread fairly as possible, right? The tax burden should be spread fairly as possible, right? Meaning that all taxpayers, they should feel the tax burden should be the same for all taxpayers, right? No one should feel as if they are paying more tax than the other, right? That's equity. However, who should pay tax and who should pay the most tax, right? So we're saying that the criteria for good tax is equity, where we're saying the tax burden should be the same for every taxpayer, right? No one should feel as if they are paying more tax than the other person. then now who should pay tax and who should pay the most tax? So that question will be answered by two principles, which is the ability to pay principal and the benefit principal. The ability to pay principal, it basically means that people should pay according to their ability, right? And the ability of a person to pay, okay, the ability to pay is determined by their level of income, right? So your level of income is the one that will determine if you'll be able to pay, if you'll be able to pay or not, right? So the ability to pay principal, it basically means ukuthi people should pay according to their abilities, and you have two notions of equity, which is horizontal equity and vertical equity. Horizontal equity, it basically means that if people are in the same position, they should be taxed equally, meaning that people that are getting the same income, they should be taxed equally. And then vertical equity, it means that people that are in different position, they should be taxed differently, right? For example, higher income earners must pay more than lower income earners, right? The rich should pay more than the poor people, right? And then another criteria for good tax is administrative simplicity, meaning that the compliance cost and the administrative cost should be as low as possible, right? Sometimes people need to provide proof that they are paying tax, right? That they're complying with the tax regulations. So those compliant costs, again, they have to be as low as possible, right? So the criteria for good tax is neutrality, which basically means ukuthi, um, they should have the minimum possible effect on the relative price, right? The tax should have the minimum possible effect on the relative price, meaning that it should be as low as possible. And also number two is equity, meaning that the tax burden should be equally spread amongst all taxpayers, right? And then equity, it raises a question, which is then now, if we're saying that the tax burden should be the same with all taxpayers, then now who is supposed to pay tax and who is supposed to pay the most, right? And then that question is answered by the two policies, which is the ability to pay policy and the benefit principle. Sorry, the principles, which is the ability to pay principal and the benefit principle. Right. So the ability to pay principal, it means that people should pay according to their abilities. Right. And then the benefit principle, it basically, oh, I didn't go over the benefit. The benefit principle basically means that if you're receiving benefit, you should pay for them. The more you receive, the more you pay. Right. And the ability to pay principal, there are two notions of equity, which is horizontal equity, that states equity. If you're receiving the same amount of income, we should pay the same amount of tax. And then vertical equity, it basically means that if we work in different positions, we should be taxed differently. For example, um, if we're in different positions, we should be taxed differently. For example, rich people should pay more than poor people. And then the different types of tax, we have direct tax. Direct tax, this one is indirect. For example, personal income tax, it is charged on an individual's income, right, or wealth. And then that's the direct tax. And then indirect tax, this one you pay it indirectly, right? Because it's charged on goods and services. For example, VAT. VAT is an indirect tax by nature. So when you buy goods and services, you pay with what? With the VAT. And then VAT is also a general tax, which is levied on most goods and services. Then we have selective tax, that is the tax which is levied on specific goods and services, such as sin tax, which is levied on tobacco and alcohol. Then we have the progressive tax. Progressive tax is the one that has been adopted in South Africa, whereby now if you earning more, you pay more, right? The higher you earn, the higher you pay. And then proportional tax, the proportional tax, the tax rate is the same with everyone, right? The tax rate is the same with all the taxpayers. It is levied on the fixed percentage of the company's profit, right? So if the actual amount of tax paid increase, the income increases, right? For example, with the proportional tax, the tax rate is the same. So let's say that tax rate is 10%, right? So if your profit was 100 rand, right? This is 100 rand. So to calculate your, let me just say 10,000. 10, 1, 2, 3. So the tax that you pay, we're gonna say times 10. So which is equals to 1,000. And then if now it increases maybe to 50,000 times 10%, each I forgot percent. So now the tax that you're going to pay is 5,000. So you can see that with the proportional tax, the tax rate is the same with all the taxpayers, right? But yeah, it's the same with all the taxpayers. So what they're saying here is that if your income increases, the amount of tax that you pay will also increase. As you can see here, from 10,000 to 50,000, also the tax what increased. So proportionate tax, the tax rate is the same with all the taxpayers. And then progressive, the higher you earn, the higher you pay, the more tax that you pay. And then with the regressive, this one again, VAT is regressive in nature because low income earners pay more than higher income earners, right? The rich people, they pay less than the poor people. Why is this so? Because, for example, if bread is 20 rand, right, without tax, and then maybe with tax it is 30 rand, right? For a rich person, that extra 10 rand, it's not that significant. Like it doesn't change anything, right? It's like they've increased the price of bread by 50 cent for a rich person. But for a poor person, that extra 10 rand, it'll it'll cause so many problems for that person, right? Because they could have used that 10 rand for something else. So regressive tax is basically meant to be the low income earners, they pay less than the higher income earners, right? It is regressive in nature. Which is obviously not. And then we have the three important taxes in South Africa. So the three important taxes in South Africa, we have company tax, value added tax, which is regressive in nature, and personal income tax. So company tax is also known as the flat tax, right? And it's proportional tax, whereby we said the tax rate is the same for every taxpayer. It is levied on a fixed percentage of the company's profits, right? And then value-added tax, it is regressive in nature, whereby now the lower income earners, they pay more than the higher income earners, right? Goods are taxed in the same. So with the value-added tax, it is the tax that you pay when you buy goods and services, right? Personal income tax, it is charged on your individual's taxable income. Here, levied on an individual's taxable income and is regressive in nature, right? Because yeah, the higher you earn, the higher you pay. Yeah, we're done. So brief assessment, if the government, let me just open answers. If the government spending is higher than current government revenue, this is known as, so if the government spending is an expense, right? The revenue will be an income. So if the expenses are higher than the income, that will be what? That will be a deficit. And then the South African personal income tax system is, in South Africa, we adopted the what? The progressive tax system where you say the high income earners pay more than the higher you earn, the higher you pay. So it's D. The regressive is the VAT, which is regressive in nature. You say low income earners pay more than high income earners. And the flat rate is also the proportional tax rate, which is also the company tax, right? Where we say um they pay the tax rate is the same with all the taxpayers, right? So the answer here is D. A tax such as VAT will generally be viewed as VAT is regressive in nature. So here's regressive because low income households spend a greater portion of their income on goods that attract VATs. Yes. So it's B. because low-income households pay higher, then they spend greater portion of their income. Then which of the following will be classed as an expansionary fiscal policy? So expansionary fiscal policy, this one is used where the this one is used in the contractionary phase of the business cycle, right? Where the economic activities are declining. So when the economic activities are declining, you can use the expansionary policy to do what? Expansionary fiscal policy. Since it's the fiscal policy, we're going to use the two variables, which is the government expenditure and taxation. So because we're in the contraction, economic activities are declining, we can increase government expenditure and reduce taxation, right? So let's see, an increase in the quantity of money, no. An increase in government taxation, no. Government taxation, we will increase it if we were in a yeah, if we're using the contractionary fiscal policy, because the contractionary is used in the expansionary phase where the economic activities are increasing, right? So to try and slow down an increasing economy, we can increase their taxation, right? So they have less money. So B is a no. An increase in government expenditure. Yes, we want to increase government expenditure because we are in this phase of a business cycle where the economic activities are declining, right? So we want to increase government expenditure and reduce the taxes. So the answer is C. Which one of the following statement is incorrect? There's no answer here. Because remember, the 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 level of the government, right? We have the central government, which is more concerned with the what, with the country as a whole. So it forms part of the general government. We also have the local government, which is concerned with a particular area in a province, right? Which is part of the general government. We also have a provincial government, which is more concerned with the particular province or region. It forms part of the general government. And these, all of them, they also form part of the what, of the public sector. So this one is also correct. And also the public corporation forms part of the public sector. So all these answers are correct. Which one of the following is an indirect tax? So indirect tax, you paid indirectly, maybe when you're purchasing goods and services, and that would be VAT. So it's B. Or exercise duties or sin tax. So the answer here is B. And then which one of the following is a direct tax? Direct tax is charged on a individual's taxable income, right? So the answer here will be, oh, company tax also is a form of direct tax, right? So the answer here is A. All of these, they are indirect. Which one of the following is not a criterion for good tax? So we say criterion for good tax is that there's neutrality, there is equity, and there's administrative simplicity. So distortability is incorrect. Company tax it's also called the flat tax, or it is also called the proportional tax, right? Because remember with the company tax, we said routine, the tax rate is the same for all the taxpayers. It is levied on the fixed percentage of the company's profit, right? So the answer here is A. Which of the following is not part of the fiscal policy? The fiscal policy slash the budget. It looks at it consists of government expenditure and taxation. So which one is not part? The budget is correct because it is the fiscal policy. Level of taxation is correct. The composition of government expenditure, yes. The stock of D is incorrect. It's not the stock of money. Which borrowing by the government, this would form part of the where the government will get its finance from, right? Because remember, we have those three questions when we are preparing the budget of the government. We'll see where does the government get its finance from, what it's gonna use how it's going to spend the funds, and it, how much will be spent. Which one of the following is a tool of expansionary fiscal policy? So expansionary fiscal policy, Guti, it is used where in this phase of the business cycle, it's expansionary, so it's going to be used in the contractionary phase of the business cycle. So relate the fiscal policy, the government uses what? Taxation and government expenditure. So if the economy is declining, the government would have to increase government expenditure and reduce tax, so people have more money, right? So what is the answer there? So in increase taxes, no. Reduce transfer, reduce regulate, increase government purchases of goods and services. Yes. So the answer here will be what? Will be D. Okay, we are done. I wish you guys all the best.